Hello everyone, this is Rochelle, one of your Helpside HR business partners, and we want to welcome you to the final round of our HR Bootcamp training, Leading a Workforce in the 21st Century. This is part 3 of 3 of our series covering best practices and resources for the entire employee life cycle. Our main presenters for today are, of course, Jeff Ng, Senior HR Business Partner, and Daryl Harmon, HR Consultant over Training and Development. Before we get started, we want to remind you of just a few things. After today's webinar, you will receive a follow-up communication containing all of the information seen at the bottom of this slide, including a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, location information for all referenced Helpside resources, including forms, documents, and templates, the SHRM and HRCI activity codes, and finally, a link to the webinar recording itself in case you would like to review it later. If during our webinar you have any questions or technical issues, please feel free to use the Q&A section located to the right of your screen. We do have HR staff standing by to help. For questions asked that might benefit all of our listeners, we will take the time to have Jeff and Daryl answer as many of those as possible, either during or toward the end of our webinar today. So it's day 3, and as promised, our focus today is on ending the employment relationship. Some of the topics covered today will include separation documents, exit interviews, and how to reduce unemployment claims. So without further ado, I'll now give the floor over to Jeff and Daryl.
Thanks, Rochelle. Welcome, everyone. We are happy you're joining us for day 3, and sometimes even good things have to come to an end. And so that's true also of employment relationships. So we're going to talk about termination, how to do it legally, how to do it effectively, how to do it wisely, and get into some of the details there. So let's talk first of all about the cost of turnover. On day 1 we talked about the cost of hiring, and those are part of the cost of turnover. But for, let's say, an $8 an hour employee, just basically entry-level employee, you have the cost of administration of someone leaving, and we'll get into the details around that as we go along. Operations takes a hit because we've lost somebody. Recruitment, of course, we talked about those costs over the last couple of days. Onboarding, then, it takes money to find people, to get people on, to train them, to get them up to speed. Of course, there's a productivity hit when you lose someone. All told, for an $8 an hour employee, the average cost is about $5,500. So we want to, of course, hire well. We want to keep our people as much as possible, but sometimes we have to incur this cost. So let's talk again about how to do this right, how to do it legally, etc. Now, before we dive into the details, we have a poll question for you, and this is a simple yes or no. So you have a 50-50 chance. Maybe. Here's the question. If you operate in an at-will state, which most of us do, or states, can you terminate employees regardless of circumstances? It's day 3. Those of you who are with us for the whole time, you're probably tired, and so we don't want to ask you a really hard question right off the bat. Good. So looks like people are chiming in. Most people are saying yes, you can. Some people are saying wait, not so fast. They may be wary of our trick questions, Jeff, that we've been asking.
I think they're starting to catch on to our little tricks here.
All right. Okay.
50-50.
50-50. So we've got people who are like, it looks obvious, but... Okay, so this is a little complicated. The short answer, Jeff, is...
The short answer is...
Yes.
Yes.
You can.
But...
There's
always a but in HR, isn't there?
Yeah.
So it depends. There's a but, all of those words. You pick which one you want. So yes, you can, but should you is what you need to ask yourself. There's probably going to be some consequences down the road if you do so.
Right, if you do it incorrectly. So let's start with the basics and the short answer, which is yes. So the at-will doctrine basically says either the employee or the employer can end the relationship at any time for any reason. Now, a little asterisk there, because in Montana and Arizona you do have to have cause to fire someone. But basically, at-will in the United States, 48 states, says either party can end the relationship. And, of course, as always, we have a tool to help you out with this.
Yes, so there's the employee separation job aid. So when you have, or when you get to do separation, if it's your first time, when you have to do this, there's a lot of different things that you have to go through. And we talked about some of those yesterday, but there's some other things you have to talk about, such as final pay by state laws. Those of you that are in Utah, which most of us are, there's the 24-hour turnaround time. If you're terminating somebody, you have to pay them within 24 hours. Other states it's some same day, other states it is also within the next pay cycle. So each state is a little different, but you have to know that. So there are several different tools and things to consider when you're terminating somebody and when you quit. And this separation job aid walks you through the different types, things to remember, things to consider. Really useful tool if you are not used to, or if you're just curious about additional ways you can hire or terminate somebody a little bit better, a little bit more compliant or legally.
Yeah, so we're going to talk you through actually both scenarios here, the voluntary and involuntary turnover that are contained on that tool that we just talked about. So voluntary is basically when the employee says, I have other things to do. So maybe it could be a new baby, maybe someone graduates and moves on, somebody moves away for some reason, they find a better job, can't imagine that, right? But sometimes they think they do, have a better job, or retirement. So this is voluntary, where the employee resigns, basically. They voluntarily terminate the employment relationship. The involuntary is when you, the employer, decide, this isn't working out. So maybe a performance improvement plan failed. That could have been for attendance or quality or productivity. For that reason, and we talked yesterday about our progressive disciplinary process that you go through. Or maybe there's a one and done. Somebody commits some egregious infraction or crime, and they're just done. And so you've decided, yeah, we're going to move on. So both of those scenarios, we will walk you through the process for that. Jeff, take us through the first one, which is voluntary turnover, where the employee resigns.
Yeah, so voluntary turnover, this is the easy part. They're coming to you and they're telling you, hey, I no longer need to or no longer want to work here. They're resigning.
Right.
This is the easy part. So let's walk through this. As soon as an employee comes to you, the best thing you can do for company protection, we'll talk why in a minute, the best thing you can do is immediately hand them the voluntary resignation form.
Immediately.
Immediately.
For reasons that will become clear.
Yes. You don't want to wait until later in the day. You don't want to wait until, a day or two before they actually leave. You want to give it to them in that moment. So when they walk up to you, you're in the hallway or walking down the hall or something else, they come to you and they say, hey, I need to put in my 2 weeks notice. Great. Come over here. Let's print this off. Let's have you fill out this form immediately. On this form, you can see it right down there. Oops, sorry, Daryl. On the form down below, you can see the voluntary resignation form. There are several different key areas that they do need to put in there. One of them being, why are they voluntarily resigning? In that moment, they're going to tell you why, if it's for better opportunity or whatever else. But if there's a problem, such as, hey, I've told you guys that I have this issue, you've done nothing to correct this issue, and now they're resigning for it, that's a pretty good indicator that they're going to file for unemployment or worse. Now you really need to take action if they're putting that on there. So that's one of the reasons you really need to have them sign this form immediately.
So this is your first protection against unemployment claims or wrongful termination claims or other kinds of lawsuits.
Yes. Yep,
Okay.
it's a very good first step.
Yeah.
Then we're moving into the exit interviews. So a lot of companies do these. This has been around for a lot of years. And there are some really good, useful questions in here. And you can see from our template below here, there's a lot of questions. Pick and choose which ones you need to ask or want to ask, whichever ones are applicable for your organization. But make sure that you ask them, and don't do it the day that they come to you and say, hey, I'm quitting, unless they're quitting that day.
That's right. We should stress that
Yes.
You want them to sign the termination form right away, the separation form right away, but then you don't follow by saying, okay, now sit down, let's do the exit
Let's
interview.
do this, yeah.
That's going to
That's
happen
separate.
a day or two before they actually leave.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a little caveat to an exit interview. If you're one of those organizations that is just doing it because that's the trend, that's what people do, we're just checking a box, yep, we did an exit interview, that's awesome, don't waste your time, don't waste the employee's time, don't bother doing an exit interview. The key to this is if you're not going to take it seriously and you're not going to take the feedback and you're not going to change based off of the responses that you get, it's really not worth anybody's time.
Right.
So be very mindful of that, your time, their time. But if you are actually going to do anything with the data that you collect, then absolutely continue doing those. They're a really good way for you as an organization to know what people think about your organization, especially those that are leaving, because if they're leaving, they're probably going to be a little bit more open and honest about the feedback they're giving you. So it's another really good tool to get some feedback about how you guys are doing.
And sometimes what they tell you isn't just about their experience. Your current employees are the ones who remain also may be facing some of these issues.
Yes.
This person is the one who has the courage to speak up because they're halfway out the door. And so we do recommend that you do them. Just do something with them.
Yes.
Your point, Jeff.
Yes. And then next, big piece of the puzzle here, make sure that you notify your payroll specialist as soon as possible. They need to know so that they get their final paycheck processed in a timely manner. Yes, in Utah, if they resign, you just have to pay them on the next payday, which is perfectly fine. But there's the employee separation notice form that's right here in the corner of your screen. There are several different questions that are asked down to the bottom, such as, are you paying them your PTO? Are they going to be getting a severance, which doesn't normally happen with resignation, but sometimes it does. Is there bonuses or commissions or anything else that needs to be paid out? So they need to be aware of any additional monies that's owed to them. So let your payroll specialist know as soon as possible. And they do want to see the separation notice anytime anybody voluntarily leaves or anytime anybody involuntarily leaves. So anytime somebody leaves your organization, get in the habit now if you can to start doing the separation notice and send that to your payroll specialist. It helps us out a lot, and it really keeps you in compliance with final pay laws and other issues that could potentially come up.
And your policies. I'm thinking about
Yes,
PTO that you
policies too.
mentioned. Some companies do pay out PTO when somebody leaves. Some companies don't. So whatever your policy says, that's what you want to follow.
Yes, absolutely. And then finally, allow the employee to finish.
Sure. I mean, you're going to get 2 more weeks out of them or whatever the notice
Yeah.
is given, right?
Yeah, you know, the transition period, you might have to hire somebody, you need this person to train the new person. Absolutely. Whenever possible, always allow the employee to finish. So if they walk up to you and say, hey, I need to put in my 2 weeks, if it's possible, if it's conducive to the company, then please allow them to finish. And let me give you a couple of examples of why you should. So if an employee comes to you and they say, hey, I need to put in my 2-week notice, and you turn around and in the back of your mind you're thinking, oh, you're not a very good employee, or we're right in the middle of a major project that we don't want this leaked out to our competitors or anything yet, you know, and so you're thinking, let's just call it good. Let's just be done today. So you tell the employee, you know what, thank you for giving us your 2-week notice, but let's go ahead and make today your last day. There's nothing wrong with that, except
something significant just happened.
Yes. It now moves from a resignation to a termination. You have now just terminated this employee by doing that. By doing that, they are now eligible for unemployment and will most likely be granted that unemployment. So if you're worried about that happening, again, we get it, we understand, not every employee is perfect. We would love it if they were, but that's not the case. So if they give the 2 weeks notice and they're not a good employee and you just want them out the door now, the best thing you could do is say, great, let's make today your last day, but we're going to pay you for the next 2 weeks. That way there's no wages lost, and they will have a much harder chance of getting any unemployment as a result, because you're paying them for the 2 weeks. Yes, they're not coming into the office, you're getting them out the door, that's perfectly fine, but you're paying them so there's no wages lost. That is the key difference, and that's why we always say try to allow the employee to finish whenever and wherever possible, or pay them out to leave. And it's not a severance, it's just paying them their regular monies owed for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, so again, if you can, I mean, we talked about the cycle time for hiring, and so you really want that 2 weeks if you can, you know, if you can do it. If the person is not a risk in any way, then keep them on for 2 weeks, let them train the replacement if possible, etc. Okay, that's the easy scenario. The slightly more difficult scenario is the involuntary turnover, where you are deciding as the employer to terminate the employment relationship. Now, the process here is largely the same, except you want to do it a little more quickly. Well, you have to do it more quickly, and there are a couple of kind of safety watch-outs. So let's give you for instance, that we might get on our hotline, our HR hotline. So let's suppose we get a call here at Helpside, and one of you has called us, and you're saying this: we just fired an employee and walked him off the property, but he has a company cell phone, a laptop, and keys to one of our trucks. We asked him to bring the equipment back, but just to be on the safe side, we need to hold his final paycheck until he does. So Jeff, tell us, what's the process for holding the final paycheck until we get our company property back?
Yeah, so biggest thing to note on this, don't do that.
The process
I don't know what else
don't
to tell
do
you.
it.
Yes, don't do that.
Okay, why, Jeff? Well, I mean, this seems reasonable. Like, that's motivation to make sure this guy gets all of our company property back to us.
Yeah, and I get that, and I understand that, and I appreciate it. However, and we do get this call quite often, actually, so this is a very real live scenario that Daryl's given us. So be very careful. The FLSA and other state and local laws do state that you have to pay out all wages owed to the employees. You cannot withhold their paychecks because they have your equipment.
Right.
There are specific things that you can do. a lot of clients call in and say, hey, we want to deduct the charges, for the laptop, for the keys, or for, whatever else they may have. If the employee has signed a deduction authorization form, then yes, you can deduct those wages from their final paycheck. If they've signed that. If the employee has not signed that, you cannot legally deduct wages from their paycheck.
So that's a tip in the hiring process. If you're issuing company equipment, uniforms, cell phones, vehicles, whatever it is, have them sign a payroll deduction authorization form. And of course, we have one of those as well that we can get to you.
Yes.
Then you can legally deduct, and with some details that we can talk to you about if you have that situation. But you can't just decide, well, we're going to hold your paycheck ransom, basically.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
Cannot do it.
Okay. Thanks for that tip. All right. Now, the next thing you want to consider then is the progressive versus the immediate termination. So we talked about the progressive disciplinary process yesterday, so you can listen to that, or if you haven't heard it already. But basically, you're going to ask yourself, is this the culmination of a progressive disciplinary process, or is this something that we immediately need to terminate the person for? So step one then is to review your progressive disciplinary process. If you've gone through that, if this is a culmination and it's maybe not news because this person's been on a final, but you want to make sure you have your ducks in a row, right? Your communication is documented, all of your documentation is there, and you have that those records there. And again, the corrective action notification form, Jeff, I think we've mentioned this before.
Yes. Yeah, we went through this in a little bit of detail yesterday. So again, review that if you need, but always try to complete this, even with terminations. Check the termination box, fill out why, have the employee sign it. Is it required? No, it's not. We do get that question quite often too. It's not required. You don't have to, but it's always best to document, especially if you're worried about unemployment or something worse coming your way.
Absolutely. And again, as we said yesterday, if you don't document it, it didn't happen. So make sure you're documenting all this stuff. Step two then is to consider possible discrimination. So think about the employee. Could he or she possibly come back with a wrongful termination suit based on ethnicity, age, pregnancy, disability, military, gender, or other things? And if you're not quite sure, once again, here's how you can reach out to us. You can reach us by email at humanresources@helpside.com or simply hr@helpside.com, or call us directly at 801-796-7472. We can talk you through the details. The third step then is to complete the pre-termination checklist. And we've created a tool for you, actually several tools around here, this step that will help you keep your cool, think clearly about your rights and what you want to do, the rights of the employee. And in fact, Jeff, why don't you talk us through these three forms that we have as part of the checklist and the associated forms?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we mentioned to have your employees sign the deduction authorization form at time of hire. But,
or at time of issue. So in case you haven't done that, you can still do it like today. Say, okay, we've given you 3 uniforms, we want those back, and if you don't return them, then we're going to deduct for those. So at some point before the termination, have that signed.
Yes. And one thing to note on those deduction authorization forms too, if you start doing those, give us a call so that we make sure that we walk you through what can happen, how it cannot happen. There are some other issues, or I'm sorry, not issues, but there's some other details about it that you need to be aware of as well. So call us before you start doing that. But terminations, when you're doing terminations, they don't always go smoothly.
No, especially the involuntary kind that we're talking about,
Especially the involuntary ones. Yeah,
it's emotional.
It's very emotional. Sometimes egos are involved, and it's just one of those, get them out the door as soon as possible so you're not thinking about the equipment that you've issued, or you're not thinking about the company credit card that they have. So this pre-termination checklist is right there, that top one. It's an extra step. Nobody really has to sign this. It's not a requirement. But it's one more thing to remember before you walk into a termination, especially if it's emotional. If it's an emotional thing where you're heated, the employee's heated, I can't believe you did that, are you kidding me, get out of here, you're fired, you're not going to think about these things. So before you walk into that termination meeting, review the pre-termination checklist to see if you're going to pay a severance. That top section right there, severance. PTO, bonuses, commissions. It's a little bit of a way to help cool you down, possibly cool the employee down as well, but really make sure that you are doing things correctly, because oftentimes when doing terminations, when they go wrong, that's when employees start to file unemployment, because now they're emotional, they're hurt, their egos are bruised, whatever it may be. They're going to file the unemployment. They're going to file something a little bit worse. So go through this to really calm the situation down, especially when it comes to your equipment. You want that back.
Right. And in fact, it's really true. I mean, statistics show it's really true that employees file wrongful termination suits more often because of how they're treated during the process rather than simply the fact that they were fired.
Yes.
Especially if you've gone through progressive discipline, they were warned, you tried to help. Or if it's a one and done, but they're far less likely to retaliate if they're treated well during this process, which you can do. There's no reason not to treat them well.
Yes, absolutely. So again, walk through these steps, go through that pre-termination checklist. Again, the separation notice form, it's that middle one. Anytime any employees leave your organization for whatever reason, send that to your payroll specialist. But really, especially pay attention to the final pay by state. Again, I mentioned most of you joining us today are from Utah. So we do have that 24-hour time period to get them paid. That does include weekends.
Right.
So in order to be compliant with the 24-hour rule that Utah has, terminating on a Friday is not the best option.
You don't call us at 4:30 on Friday and...
Yes, because they are not going to get paid.
Yeah, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, so be very mindful about when and how and where to do the termination. So if possible, try to do it on Thursday. That way you're letting your payroll specialist know that we need to process the final paycheck. We can get that done by Friday. If it's done on Friday, even if it's done in the morning, there's a good chance we can get them their paycheck that same day, or if it's direct deposit by Saturday. But if you're letting us know Friday afternoon, anytime Friday afternoon, it's not going to happen until the following Monday or Tuesday. Not in compliance with the 24-hour rule. Some employees do get upset by that, and they go down and they file wage claims against your organization. We don't want to see that happen to you, which is why we're telling you all of this.
Absolutely.
Again, not to scare you, just to be mindful of these things.
That's true. That's good advice. In fact, yeah, for all those reasons, try to avoid Friday firings if at all possible.
Yes.
Sometimes they happen, and you need to do it. All right. That was step 3. Step 4 then is, as we've been saying, notify your payroll specialist. This time we're really serious, as soon as possible. So as soon as you can do that, once you know. And my experience has been most of our clients do. They let us know before they've even done the actual termination. They say, hey, listen, we've had this guy on a PIP, it didn't work out, or hey, he came and did such and such, and so we're letting you know, and so we can get all the stuff in the background working. The 5th step then is to actually conduct the termination meeting. So you can see 4 steps rather before we even sit down with the employee. And a couple of best practices around this is, first thing is the direct leader is the one who leads the meeting. So the supervisor of the employee, the most immediate supervisor, will actually deliver the message because he or she is the one who has been working with the employee or is responsible. So if the employee does a one and done kind of thing, then that manager, supervisor, et cetera, will sit down and say, listen, this isn't working out. We're going to terminate your employment. So you want to be direct, you want to be factual, you don't want to apologize because there's nothing to apologize for, you're not there to blame, you're there simply to say things didn't work out. Then you have an executive or maybe an HR person who's there serving as a witness and who will deliver the next step information. So once the manager says we're going to terminate your employment starting right now or whenever it is, then the other person will say, okay, and here's what you can expect for a final paycheck, for any payouts, your COBRA information. That way then this third party, neutral party can deliver that. And this all should take 5 to 10 minutes maybe. You might answer a question or two, but really it's a done deal. So there's no use in rehashing old news or giving long explanations. You simply say, this is why we're doing it, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and that's basically it. Again, you want to treat the person humanely because it's a human being, but this is where things can get emotional, as Jeff talked about earlier. And so you want to be as brief as possible without being curt. The final step then is to communicate with team members. So the rest of your team needs to know that this has happened. They need to know that the now former coworker of theirs was treated with fairness and dignity and respect. You want to dispel any rumors without going into too much detail because the reasons are between you and the former employee. Answer the questions that you're able to answer to be sure. But again, this is an issue with that former employee, and it's frankly not the remaining team members' business around all the details. But then you do want to talk to them, okay, so what are the implications? We're going to have to cover for this person. We're going to rehire someone, whatever the next steps are. That's going to be important for the people who remain. And then that's it. That's a simple process.
Yeah.
Simple but not easy. So in summary, because that was a mouthful we just went
That was a
over.
lot.
Review your progressive disciplinary process. Make sure your ducks are in a row. Consider possible discrimination claims and avoid those when possible. Complete the pre-termination checklist with the associated forms. Notify your payroll specialist as soon as you can. Then conduct the termination meeting and then have a follow-up communication with the remaining employees. And the communication, step 6, typically is face-to-face, that's best. But if you have remote employees, then reach out to them by phone, by email, however you need to. But you just want to let the rest of the team know this has happened and this is what it means for us going forward. Now, Hal Lancaster said it this way: getting fired is nature's way of telling you that you had the wrong job in the first place. So it happens, right? It happens. I mean, it happens fairly frequently. And sometimes it's simply because there wasn't a good fit at the beginning, or over time things just didn't work out. So we do it, we need to do it, and then we move on from that. So let's talk about some of that aftermath, Jeff. You've mentioned a couple of times unemployment claims. So let's talk everyone through that process. In fact, we'll begin with the law of unemployment insurance.
Nice, yeah. So the law of unemployment insurance is very simple, and it says unemployment compensation is intended for those who are unemployed through no fault of their own.
Right.
We're going to talk about that last piece, the no fault of their own, and really determine who and how and when they're eligible for unemployment, and then walk you through what the unemployment process looks like. So with that, voluntary versus involuntary, Daryl has taken us through this. Voluntary is I quit, and generally that means an employee is presumed to be disqualified from unemployment benefits if he or she quit employment. And Daryl gave us a few examples. We're going to give you a few more here in just a minute. And then the involuntary, where they're showing you the door, is an employee who was discharged from employment by an employer generally receives benefits. Unemployment benefits.
Right.
Let me clarify that.
Sure.
Okay? So there are times where yes, they get it. There are times where no, they don't get it. And let's walk through what those are. And these are called good cause versus just cause. Who is responsible for the loss of employment? All right, so there's good cause. If an employee...
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
So this is a good cause for someone to quit.
Yes.
These are kind of on first the employee side, then the employer side, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, so if an employee leaves for any of these, what are classified as good causes, then there is a good chance that they may get unemployment.
Right.
There's a variety of other reasons why anybody would leave, but these are generally the reasons why they could potentially get unemployment.
Yeah, a lot of times if you take a look at this list, it's really things that are out of the employee's control.
Yes.
They're not really responsible, so who is responsible for the loss of employment? It's not really the employee, and therefore then they would qualify typically for unemployment insurance.
Yep. And then on the flip side, if the employer is terminating them for what is called a just cause, then they are not eligible, or generally not eligible.
Right.
Sometimes they are.
We say that because we can't predict what judges will say. But
Yeah, and we've seen some crazy things happen, so that's why we say generally. But if they are being terminated for harassment and theft, and you have evidence and documentation to support it, then yes, there's a very good chance they will not be awarded. But if you do terminate for theft but have zero documentation, there's a good chance the employee is probably going to get it. So yes, even though there are just causes for termination, the employer still has the burden of proof to prove that yes, we terminated with cause.
Right.
So keep that in mind. Yes, we're at will, and this is where we said sometimes there are consequences. Yes, you can terminate, but without documentation, there are consequences.
Great. So let me give you an example, Jeff, kind of give us your take on this one. So we've got an employee that we're going to call Cranky Cal for reasons that are probably pretty obvious, right? He doesn't have the best attitude, but he had some skills, so we hired him. Well, we thought he had skills, but he's a poor performer. And to put the icing on the cake, he's also late a lot. And not only that, but he likes to take long lunches. And so his supervisor has had a verbal discussion with him. Shape up, Cal. You got to get here on time. You got to do a better job. And so Cal says, yeah, fine, whatever. And after, about 9 months on the job, Cal feels like it's time to ask for a raise because I've been around doing some pretty good work. Well, shock of shocks, Cal has denied that raise request, and so his performance declines if that's even possible. And so after that, then we finally said, you know what, this is not working out. So Cal, so long, farewell, good luck to you. Cranky Cal goes to Cheerful Cal when he goes and applies for unemployment, and he actually gets it. So Jeff, somehow this doesn't seem right. So talk to us about what did we do wrong, what didn't we do right, how do we avoid paying unnecessary unemployment claims?
Yeah, so right off the bat, you had said that the supervisor went to him and said, shape up, Cal.
Right.
So there was a verbal conversation that took place.
Right.
But where's the documentation?
Because if it's not documented,
It didn't happen, right?
It's your word against Cal's word.
Yes.
He's shown the door, and it doesn't yet look like a just cause case without documentation.
Yeah, the burden of proof is on the employer for that, and without the documentation, the judge sees it just like that.
Okay, anything else catch your eye on that, or was that kind of our biggest mistake, is that we didn't really document things with Cal? We kind of went through a progressive disciplinary process, kind of.
Kind of.
We, the supervisor talked to him, we denied his request for a raise, but really, there wasn't much that we did to help him succeed or to really tell him, you got to shape up.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to another Helpside hotline scenario, and we've got a caller who says this. We have an employee with a bad attitude, right? We've talked to her about it numerous times. She came in today and was very rude to another team member and made her cry. Utah, which is where we're operating, it's an at-will employment state. So this one's solid, right? We can fire her, right, Jeff? Right? Please?
If only we could say absolutely.
Right. Probably. Maybe.
Yes.
Okay, well, what's holding us back?
Yeah, so I love that last little clause there where it said we want her gone and don't want to pay her unemployment. We get that, we understand that, but again, without the documentation or without some sort of progressive disciplinary, you're going to have a really hard time winning that unemployment claim. So yes, you can terminate, and you might do that, which is perfectly fine.
Right.
If she files unemployment, the best thing you could do is probably just let it slide. Don't worry about fighting it. Don't worry about anything else. Just get her out of there because you need a better morale. You need better productivity out of everybody else. So sometimes, yes, you may need to make that hard decision and terminate and not worry about unemployment.
But next time, document,
Yes.
and then, so talk us through the unemployment process, Jeff, so that we can see kind of the gears in motion here that will determine whether or not someone is granted unemployment insurance benefits or not.
Yeah, so this is the overview. This is what happens. This is the process. So the employee leaves on their own or involuntarily, either way. They go down to the unemployment office or online and they file for unemployment. Once that happens, the unemployment office lets us know or lets you know that they have filed for unemployment, depending on how that is set up. But somebody's notified that they filed for unemployment. Then there it goes. Okay. So there's two options once the employer has been notified. You can choose to not respond and just let it slide, let it go, don't worry about it, in which case there's a very good chance that the former employee will be awarded unemployment benefits.
Wait, let me guess the second option, Jeff.
Yes.
It's respond, right?
It's respond, yes.
Obviously only one of two.
Yes.
I'm pretty good at the 50-50 when you give me the other 50. So.
Yeah, there you go. So the other option, like Darryl said, is yes, you can respond. And what that process looks like is you are going to send all of your documentation at that point. So any write-ups, any verbal conversations, any videos, any pictures, anything you have, you will send to the unemployment office. And then the judge will make a decision based off of what the employee says versus the documentation that you submit to the state. The judge makes a decision to either award the employee or deny the employee unemployment benefits. Seems pretty simple so far, but this is where it gets a little tricky because not everybody likes the decisions that the judges make. So therefore, there's one more step in this. If either party does not like the decision, either party can appeal. So if the employee is not awarded, they can appeal and say, no, I believe I deserve it because of X, Y, and Z, whatever it may be. Or the employer may say, no, we have sufficient documentation to back up and prove, no, we're not wanting to give them unemployment. So when that happens, you get on the phone with the judge, with the administrative law judge, and you do an unemployment hearing. You present your facts, your documentation. The former employee does the same thing. Then the judge makes a final decision.
The final, right?
A final.
This one sticks.
Yeah, final decision, and that decision is either to award or deny. They could overrule their first initial ruling. It's happened before. They do overrule it sometimes, and they do reverse it. It's a thing. It's okay. But whatever happens at that point sticks.
Jeff, is this the same judge in both cases, or is it sometimes a different judge? Or do you know that?
Sometimes, more often than not, they are different.
Okay.
They are different people looking at the case. So
it
a couple
could be
set of
different,
eyes.
yeah.
Yep.
But that's, again, why we're going to beat this dead horse. That's why you want to have documentation. And we mentioned in the termination meeting that you have with the employee, you're going to be brief, and so they may be unaware of all of the documentation you've accumulated. You're just basically saying we're going to terminate your employment for this reason, and they may be unaware, and so this is where you would bring that forward and say, no, we really did have a good, just cause to terminate the employment.
Yeah,
Right.
and on this note too, so that's the overview how it works.
Right.
Now, we get calls quite often from our clients saying, hey, I don't want this to affect our rates.
Yeah.
So on this part, if you don't want your rates to increase, you do want to try to fight as many unemployment claims as possible, because the way that the rates are increased is the state has a formula. They don't really share what that formula looks like. But if you have multiple unemployment claims for the same reason, or if you have a lot of layoffs in a year, they're going to look at your business trends and realize, oh, they keep laying people off, or they keep terminating people, or people keep leaving because of harassment issues or whatever else, and they may say, oh, we anticipate you're going to do the same thing this next year. We're going to raise your rates to help cover the cost, because another misconception about all of this is oftentimes our clients believe, or anybody believes for that matter, if the former employee is granted the unemployment, a lot of people think, oh, now I have to pay that out of my pocket. That's not how it works. Every organization, every business is already paying unemployment insurance tax.
That's why it's insurance. It's not coming out of your bottom line necessarily.
Yes.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind as well. If you don't want your rates to go up, fight as many as you can. But again, we understand sometimes you just want to let it go. Don't worry about it. And that's okay too. Ultimately, your rates may go up. They may not.
Great. Thanks for kind of opening the door on that process for us, Jeff. All right, let's go through a couple of scenarios and let our listeners now be the judge. We're going to give you 3 scenarios here and a few details around that. And we'll simply ask you this question: would you grant unemployment to this person or not? Our first one is Sleepy Sloan. You can see him right there sleeping at his desk. So here's what happened. Sleepy Sloan is caught by his supervisor sleeping on the job. So he wakes Sloan up, reminds him of the no sleeping on duty policy, and says, Sloan, you got to stay awake to do your job, right? Sloan says, okay, I get it. And the supervisor says, all right, this is a verbal warning. And of course, the supervisor documents that. A few weeks later, the supervisor catches Sloan sleeping again, wakes him up and said, Sloan, we talked about this. I'm going to have to move to a written warning, and the next time if I catch you sleeping on the job again, that's going to be a final. Sloan says, okay, I understand, I'm going to stay awake. Well, a few weeks later, Sleepy Sloan falls asleep again, and his supervisor catches him and says, Sloan, 3 strikes, you're out. So Sloan says, all right, I get it. Sloan goes off, he applies for unemployment insurance. Would you grant it to him? All right, we've got some votes coming in already. Judges, tell us what you would do.
Yeah, so it looks like so far everybody's guessing no, they would not award unemployment.
Yeah, they've been doing everything we've been telling them.
Yeah.
Progressive discipline, document it, this is for cause. Oh.
Now we're going the other way almost.
I got
Okay.
some people saying, wait a minute.
Maybe they hear something in our voices to think, oh, well, I got to change my answer. I don't know.
Again, they're suspicious. Like, wait, these guys always, their
try to
favorite
trick us.
answer is it depends and
It is,
maybe and things like that. All right, so most people are not going to award Sloan unemployment because this looks pretty, right? It looks like a just cause.
It does.
Okay, and maybe it would be. But Jeff, what did we miss in the process?
Okay, so let's talk about what went well.
Okay.
They documented. They
Right.
gave the verbal, the written, and the final. They told him, absolutely, we're going to terminate you if you do this again. So I agree, partially. Based off of that information alone, I agree.
Right.
The judge would probably not award unemployment. However,
Of course.
here comes the big but. We don't know why Sleepy Sloan is falling asleep. The supervisor never actually asked him, why are you falling asleep at your desk? Because if he had asked that question, if Sleepy Sloan had some sort of sleep disorder that's covered by the ADA, that changes everything. Now you've terminated for a medical condition, which
Right.
opens up a whole different ballgame.
Right.
But the judge would probably not award, probably would award
Yeah.
because the employer failed to figure out why
Yeah.
Sleepy Sloan was falling asleep. So it's a 50-50 chance.
All right.
And yes, they did a lot of things right, but there's one little key piece that got missed, and some judges would catch that, others might not. So it's very tricky, very subjective.
This goes back to the say process we talked about in earlier webinars, where you really want to have a conversation. You don't want to just say, hey, wake up, I'm going to write you up. So dig down into the details. If those are solid, then it's likely that someone will not get unemployment and won't come back with a wrongful termination suit. Okay, excellent. Okay, our next scenario then is, there we go.
Okay.
Talk us through this transportation interruption.
So we have transportation interruption, and this one's a good one. We have Best Bakery is a 24-hour bakery that requires a full staff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Okay.
They must be really good.
Yes.
So one of the employees, Becca, quits working because the bus route she has been using to come to work is canceled due to cutbacks in commuter usage.
Okay.
That's a very real thing.
But she's got to get to work.
Yes. So as a result of this, Becca lets her employer know that she needs to quit. They thank her for her service, and they let her know that if anything changes, they would hire her back.
Nice.
So she goes down, she files for unemployment. You guys be the judge. Would she be awarded unemployment? And it looks like a lot of you are already saying yes. We kind of gave that answer away earlier.
Mm-hmm. But she has resigned, so we did say that typically when someone resigns, they don't get unemployment.
Yeah.
Kind of comes down to who's responsible for that.
Yeah. So this is good. We've got a couple.
Most people are saying yes.
Some
saying
no.
Nah. She quit, right?
She
so
did.
You don't grant unemployment when someone quits.
That is very true. So with all of this,
right,
and this is fun. Again, this is a real scenario that we've had to deal with.
Sure.
With this, I would agree with most of you that yes, she would probably be awarded unemployment. Some things to note, though, is if possible, if the employer could ask her, hey, are there carpool options? Can you ride with somebody else? Is there a different bus? Is there a train? Or do you have a bike or any other way to get to work? If the employer can show that they did everything in their power to try to get her here, some companies, larger companies I should say, some larger companies have some sort of a rideshare bus. They own a bus. They go around and pick up their employees for situations like this.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if the employer can show that they tried to keep her in some way, shape, or form, and they show that to a judge, there's a possibility that the judge would not award because the company is trying to keep her. They're trying to present options, and if she's not accepting those options, then it becomes a little bit of a different story.
Yeah.
A little tricky.
So what I was going to ask is, so sort of a variation on this, what if a company moves its location and there isn't public transportation, or maybe they're moving 75 miles away and employees say, oh, I can't, I don't have a car to drive me that far, or that's a whole different ballgame. Okay.
And I like that. That's that's a very real question. Because again, it goes back to no fault of your own.
Oh, so who's responsible in this case?
Because the client moved and made it a little bit more harder on the employees to get there. Like Daryl said, they may not be able to. They don't have a car that can go that far, can't afford gas, whatever it may be. It's the employer's fault at that point. So yes, there's a very good and real chance that the employees that resigned due to those transportation issues will be given unemployment benefits.
Right. And so this, again, if it's one or two people, then maybe in that scenario you don't worry about it. If it is 5 or 10 or 20, then you still might not be able to fight that.
Yes.
Just move on.
Yep.
Okay.
Good scenario. Good spin off there.
Okay. Our last one then is the case of Tardy Terry. And here's Terry's situation. He's a customer service agent. He's been with the company almost 2 years. But over the past few weeks, he's starting to come in late. 10, 15, 25 minutes. His manager talked to him about his tardiness and let him know that he can't do that. And he says, oh, yeah, well, you know what? I had some personal stuff going on, but that's all cleared up, so I'll be here on time. And for several months, he is on time. And it's prompt Terry instead of tardy Terry. But then Terry gets a new manager, and we start to see him slide back into the old habits of sliding in 15 to 25 minutes late. His new manager talks to him about that, and he says, oh, yeah, you know what? I've had some personal issues, but I'm going to take care of those, and it's going to be fine. So a couple more months go by, and Terry starts to show up late again. His manager says, listen, based on what you've done in the past, based on what's happening now, I'm going to let you go. Is Terry going to get unemployment? Is he not going to get unemployment? What do you think?
50-50. I think they're onto us a little bit here, Joe.
Well, it's a little tougher.
60, this one is tough.
I think they're punchy because it looks pretty obvious because Terry's just not showing up. He's not doing the job. He's violating the on-time policy. But some are suspicious, saying, these guys got some ace up their sleeve or something.
And it's back to 50-50. So it started to split for a second there. Okay.
So Jeff, talk us through, what did we do well, if anything? What could we have done differently? What do you think the likelihood is that Terry would get unemployment?
Yeah. So the manager did several things. They had several conversations, which is really good. Make sure you're doing that, absolutely. And Terry did admit that he does have some personal matters outside of work that's affecting him being able to get to work. Now, here's where it started to break down, and this is similar to our first scenario here, that we don't know why he's actually late. He just says he has some outside issues.
Yeah.
So, if he's got a sleeping disorder, or if he has a babysitting issue, or there's transportation issues, something that's causing him to not be there on time, and you don't find out why, then yes, he's probably going to get unemployment because the judge will ask. They usually do.
Right.
Okay. And there's no documentation here, so that's the other fail on the employer's part. Yes, you had conversations, but again, if you don't document it, it didn't happen, right? So we can't stress that enough.
Right.
So it could go either way on this one.
So it sounds like the fix is pretty easy, right? We want to have a little more detailed conversation with an employee, ask if they need an accommodation. We don't necessarily ask about medical conditions at this point, but if we talk to Terry and we say, well, whatever, if it comes out that he does need some sort of accommodation and we can have that actually backed up by medical documentation, then we make that accommodation, like you said, maybe it's a change in his start time, then we're going to be on more solid ground, and we document.
Yeah. Along with all of that,
right.
We have a question here from Laura on this situation asking about health concerns. And the question says, what if the issue has something to do with health and we can't ask, let me try that again.
Right.
What if the issue has something to do with health and we can't ask about that? I love this question, Laura. Thank you for bringing this up because you're right. We cannot blatantly flat out say, hey, what's medically wrong with you?
Right.
That's
not our business.
For starters, yes. Yeah. We can't blatantly come out with that. But what we can do is we can ask, hey, what's causing you to be late? If they freely bring up medical issues at that point and they say, oh, I've got this medical condition, I've got this, at that point, then you would need to start making or potentially making some medical accommodations, ADA accommodations, FMLA may need to come into play here at the same time. So that is a great question. Thank you, Laura, for bringing that up. We appreciate it.
This sounds similar to the hiring questions that we talked about in the past, right? Bad questions and better questions. And so there's a wrong way to ask Terry about his tardiness, and there's a right way to talk to him about it. And again, we're trying to get, we're trying to keep Terry, we're trying to get him to work on time, and we want to accommodate that if we need to, and not just kind of move simply because he's late. Maybe there's something that we can work with him on.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I think we've got some well-trained judges, Jeff.
We do.
Some suspicious judges of ours, which, frankly, that's kind of our job as well. When we have complaints call in or questions come in, we do some investigating. Just as a judge would ask and get some details, we do the same thing. That's what we want to convey to all of you, is get into some of the details, find out what's actually going on, try and fix the situation if you can. If not, then you can move to disciplinary action and maybe termination. And if, of course, you have questions about any of that, we're here to help.
We are absolutely here to help. And one resource for you, if or when you do have somebody that files for unemployment, let us know. If you want to contest the unemployment, absolutely. We have this Helpside Unemployment Eligibility Guide, and it's a 31-question guide that some of our team members have put together for us, and it walks through not every, but most possible scenarios. Was it medically related? Was it performance? What was it? What happened? What was the final straw? We're going to ask all of those hard questions that a judge is going to ask, and based off of those answers that you give us, we can really pinpoint what we need to present to the state to help you win those unemployment claims. So like Darryl said, if you have questions or if you would like our assistance with some of those, give us a call, let us know. We are happy to walk through and take you through some of those hearings and things.
Excellent. Okay, Rochelle, I think we're done. We told them everything we know.
Yeah, not so fast, Earl. So we actually had,
All right.
we actually had a lot of questions come in, and so if you guys are up for it,
Sure.
we'd like to definitely get a few of those answered. So the first question actually came in from Eric, who's on with us today, and he wanted to know if poor attendance would qualify as just cause if they have documentation, timesheets, and all of that to prove it.
It's a good start, yes. Because again, similar to that scenario we just went through, yes. That was hard.
Yeah, that's the short answer.
The short answer is yes.
It sounds like Eric is listening to us.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Go through the process, document it, etc. Sometimes there's some details that we need to get into, but yeah.
And if you know why they're late,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like how we mentioned, if you know why they're late and you need to make an accommodation for it, then try to do that if you can. But if they just can't wake themselves out of bed, or they've got a million other chores, they got to stop at Starbucks and get their coffee, otherwise they can't function. If it's things like that, then no, that's not an accommodation you have to make. So really kind of boil down and find out why they're being late, and that'll really help your cause.
And we don't want to send the message that you can never fire anyone who's
Right.
a bad employee, who
Right.
doesn't show up on time. We understand you're running businesses. We get that, and we're here really just to help you do that and just avoid the legal pitfalls and whatnot. So
Yep,
once
absolutely.
again.
Awesome. Okay. We had another one that kind of goes back to what we were talking about yesterday with the progressive discipline process. And so with corrective action, in order to move an employee from a verbal to a written or a written to a final, does it have to be for the same type of offense?
Good question.
That is a great question. And the answer to that is, it
It
depends.
depends.
I'm sorry to say it, I know.
So certainly if it is the same offense, then you've got a pretty clear path.
Yes.
But that's not the question. The question is, what if it's attendance this time and then it's quality another time? Yeah.
That is very much a business decision. The business and the organization gets to determine what that looks like.
Right.
Do you have two different tracks, one for attendance, one for everything else?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you just have one track? It doesn't matter if it's attendance, performance, quality, or whatever else. It's just one track and you go through that progressive. That's a decision the organization has to make. And then the biggest thing with that is you have to be consistent in following that practice and that policy moving forward after that.
Yeah, in fact, when we talked about the disciplinary process earlier, you had mentioned different kinds of violation or different types, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
And what you would advise people is to pick one when you're terminating, but along the way they may accumulate different ones.
Yes.
They may have shown up impaired and that caused productivity or safety, and so you can write them up for both of those, or if those happen at separate times, you can do that. When it comes down to the end, then you might pick one, maybe the most egregious or the straw that broke the camel's back. But yeah, it's your call. Once again, we know you're running businesses, and you've got to have a good workforce.
Yep. And there's pros and cons to both.
Sure.
You just have to figure out what works best for your organization.
Yeah.
All right, so we have another question. This one's a little bit tricky. So what if an employee verbally resigns or walks off the job? So I'm assuming that they're pretty upset and they just leave.
Said, I've had it. I'm done with
I'm
you.
done.
Yeah.
Getting out of here.
It happens.
But then they come back the next day and they say that they didn't quit and it was just a misunderstanding. Can we still call it a resignation or job abandonment? And what's the likelihood that that employee would get unemployment?
Yeah, we talked about signing that separation, that voluntary separation form, Jeff, right? So this is another scenario.
What if you can't? Like they just leave.
Yeah, okay.
And we get it sometimes they're not going to be willing or wanting to turn around to fill out that form, absolutely.
Right.
So this is kind of a multi-step process. When that happens, immediately go to your desk, type up some notes about what just happened.
Right, documentation.
That'll kind of take place of the voluntary resignation form. You're typing your notes, you're saying, hey, we just watched this person walk off the job, they said they're not coming back, whatever they said. Type up those notes, that'll take the place of that. That's the first thing. But if they come back the next day and say, oh, it was just a misunderstanding, at that point you get to determine, do you want to give this person another shot, or do you want to take them at their word? Either way is perfectly fine. There's going to be a risk either way.
Right.
Because if you bring them back, are you sure they're not going to do that to you again?
Right, and you kind of set a precedent.
Absolutely.
If somebody else does that, you also have to cut them some slack.
Yes. So it's risky bringing them back, and it's also risky not letting them come back.
Right.
You just get to make that determination. And again, this may be one of those cases where sorry, you said you're done. We've already started looking for somebody else because we have to have somebody here.
We contacted our Helpside payroll specialist. That process is already underway.
Yeah. So really, it's a business decision on how you want to move forward. Either way is fine, and it may be one of those situations too where if you do say nope, don't come back, you just let unemployment slide. It might be one of those types of cases. Yeah. But ultimately, you get to be the decision maker on that type of a scenario. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that one's kind of a tough one.
That is tough. Yeah.
Okay, so this one goes back to when you've terminated an employee and they still have some of your equipment. What if the cost of the equipment that the employee has not returned is more than what we owe them or leaves them close to a zero check? How much can we actually deduct?
Right, and so this is assuming that they've signed the payroll deduction authorization form, and they've got a laptop that's worth $2,000, and yet they've only worked a day, and so we owe them, who knows, a couple $100.
Right.
Right, yeah.
Now, what do we do?
That's where it gets really tricky because in some cases, depending on the situation, and this is one of those, it's going to be a case-by-case scenario. In this case, when it happens, give us a call because there's 100 other questions that we're going to be asking about it. Because there are some times where, yes, you can deduct the full amount. Even if it doesn't cover, you can give them a zero check. And there are other times where you can only deduct down to minimum wage. So they still have to take home something. So there's a lot of questions to ask you guys of this. So I can't give a good definitive if this, then this. There's a lot of ifs and thens and buts and coconuts to go along with it. So call us when situations like that happen. We'll be happy to go through it with you.
Okay. All right. It looks like we have one more. So what if somebody leaves for good cause, like because they need to stay home with their kids or transportation issues? However, they were also on a high level of corrective action, like maybe even on a final, and we just hadn't termed them yet. Would that help our unemployment case? Would that be taken into consideration?
Well, you haven't termed them yet, so they are still an employee, and it's probably, again, we can't predict what judges will say, but it looks like they may well be able to get unemployment because they've left for a good cause. That's the ultimate, right? I mean, a judge may take into consideration that this person was on his or her way out as it was, but that didn't happen yet. So, again, kind of depending on how the judge reads the situation.
Right. Okay. All right, well, that's all of our questions. So we wanted to leave you with a quote by Jim Rohn. And he said, "Learning is the beginning of wealth. Learning is the beginning of health. Searching and learning is where the miracle process all begins." We certainly hope you've had some great takeaways over the last 3 days. And while our goal has been to help all of you in your learning process, we certainly in turn learn from our clients every day. Thank you so much for trusting us with your business and always keeping us on our toes with all of your questions. If you do have any other questions, we're going to hang out here on the line for just a few more minutes before ending the webinar. And if not, we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.